Nova Scotia just went through 3 days of heavy snowfall, with preliminary snowfall totals exceeding that of what we saw during White 1 in 2004. Now that created quite a mess. But out here, it's also really beautiful and an opportunity to get outside in the winter. I'm here at the Portobello Incline Plain on the edge of Lake William, and on today's walkabout, I'm going to be not only heading in towards Dartmouth Shubie Park, but I'm going to be heading on a journey through the seasons. I'm starting my journey at the Portobello Incline Plain in Waverley, which was an important part of the Shubenacadie Canal system. That system was designed to help boats get from Halifax Harbour to the Minas Basin without having to go around the province, a dangerous and long trip in the 1800s. So this is where the actual incline plane itself was. Now, it was one of two on the system, and it was completed in 1858. The purpose of an incline plane, this one in particular, was actually to help boats get between Lake Charles and Lake William, a difference in height of about 30 feet. So over the 600 feet of this hill, boats would come on almost like a moving dry dock, and they would be either raised or lowered along this system. It was actually quite impressive in its day. The Marine Railway was operated by Henry Finley, whose name now adorns a community center in downtown Dartmouth near another of the incline planes, and also a well-known canal feature, Sullivan's Pond. If you head to downtown Dartmouth, you can see a fully excavated and largely reconstructed marine railway. It would have looked a lot like this site, though this one was smaller. This place has been largely untouched and unexplored since it ceased operations in 1870. The remnants of the plane lay buried here, a place which is still popular as a way to move boats between the lakes. It's just now, it's done by people power and not a railway. This bridge crosses the location of what were two unfinished locks on the canal system. The canal project was abandoned for a short period of time, and a new design was created based on the Morris Canal in New Jersey, and that included marine railways. And that's why you now have two marine railways on this system, including the one behind me. Now from here, you can either go that way to Dartmouth, which is where I'm going to be headed, or you can go that way, which would take you towards Lake William. The trail isn't quite finished that way yet. There's about a kilometer of bushwhacking through the woods to get to the Lake William Trail, but it's still a nice walk. It may feel like everything goes off to hibernate in winter, but forests are teeming with life. Sure, there are the animals tucked away for a warm winter sleep, but animals like the snowshoe hare and deer can be found year-round. The hare is sometimes called the varying hare because it's brown in summer, leading some to think it's a rabbit, while white in winter. Changing color helps it to camouflage for the season. On warm winter days, you'll also see red squirrels, which don't hibernate, but much like many humans, stay curled up in their homes when it's particularly cold out. Their cousins, the chipmunks, sleep a bit more intensely, entering rounds of deep sleep over winter, though still not a true hibernation. Woodchucks, however, are true hibernators, and some even wake up to give a prediction of spring. In fact, Shubenacadie Sam told Nova Scotians winter was over, only a day or two before this snowfall. I'm thinking she probably went back into hibernation. Well, I am not going to lie to you. I am not a fan of winter. You give me a hot, warm, sunny day on a trail any day, and I will take it over winter. But there is something to be said about the prettiness that the snow brings to this area. Even a sereneness, despite all the traffic noise, there is still sort of a serene sense in the woods with all this snow here. Things have changed a lot. You know, at one time, the city of Dartmouth used to check the ice thickness on the lakes, and they've stopped that this year because it just doesn't freeze very often, at least not safely enough for skating. And these trails at one time were actually groomed for cross-country skiing, but snow is so rare, at least snow that lasts in the city, that all the machine groomers that used to be used in this area have now moved out of the city where snow is a little bit more consistent. But that's just a sign of how the climate is changing, and that's going to impact the forests too. The changing climate is anticipated to impact the animals and species throughout forests like this. One provincial risk assessment suggests that by the year 2100, there could be just 2 weeks of snow annually, province-wide. Less snow would mean problems for germination of species like balsam fir, and the roots of many species which rely on the insulation of snow could be killed off. It could also mean less moisture in the ground come spring, and that would increase the risk of forest fires in Nova Scotia. Well, I've made it to the Lake Charles trailhead, and behind me here, this series of ponds is where ships would have waited as they were going to transit from Lake Charles through to Lake William. At least that was the plan when the canal was first envisioned. But this also explains why the canal, even if it had become successful, would have only ever been a seasonal venture. This waterway freezes at times. The bridge here connects to a parking lot marking the intersection of the Portobello Incline Plain Trail section and the Lake Charles Trail. Now, as you cross under the highway overpass, from here it's about 5 kilometers to the Fairbanks Centre, which is home to the Shubenacadie Waterway Museum. At this point on the Lake Charles Trail, it splits off. There's an old route here, an access road of sorts that follows along the highway and is popular with trail runners, and it actually creates a loop. The main trail is here, and it heads towards Dartmouth, and that's where I'm going. After the break, headed towards Shuby Park and continuing my journey through the seasons. Some months have passed and winter has turned into spring. The temperatures have warmed up. The buds have come out on the trees. Animals are beginning to come out of their hiding places. I'm on the Lake Charles Trail traveling towards Shuby Park and Dartmouth. And before the break, I started at the Portobello Plain, traveling along a route carved by humans and nature. Earlier, I mentioned that the dream of ships traveling this route with cargo never really materialized in the way the founders of the Shubenacadie Canal expected. The first step in construction of the waterway came in 1796 when the Nova Scotia legislature ordered a survey at a cost of £32,000. The legislature shortly thereafter shelved the plans for a canal, but it was revived in 1824 when a new feasibility study was launched. A massive plan was developed that would see 19 locks between Halifax and the Minas Basin, including 7 just between the harbor and Lake Bannock. There were plans for tugboats pulling 30 tons of cargo each, as well as sailing ships, steamships, and barges. In 1826, the Shubenacadie Canal Company was formed to make that dream a reality. Michael Wallace, who you've heard me talk about on other hikes around Nova Scotia, and for whom this area, Port Wallace, is named, was appointed president. Samuel Kennard, the Samuel Kennard of Kennard Lines, became vice president, and Charles Fairbanks became the company secretary. Though there was a small government subsidy, the company was largely funded privately by local business people, including one rather famous brewmaster and later the 4th Mayor of Halifax, Alexander Keith. One of the other signs of spring in this area are snapping turtles coming out of what is called brumation, which is a little bit like hibernation, but the turtles don't actually sleep. What they do is they settle into the mud and the water, and you can sometimes see them moving under the ice, but they really become very lethargic for the winter. Anyways, as it's starting to warm up, the water's running, and those turtles are coming out. They're getting ready to lay their eggs. Well, I'm going to take a short detour off the main trail here. onto a woodland path that will take me to a spot overlooking Lake Charles. It's a path of a few hundred meters and is called Vivian's Way. It's lollipop shaped and will bring me right back to this spot. This path is named for Vivian Srivastava, who passed away in 2004. Now, Vivian was involved with the modern Shubenacadie Canal Commission and was instrumental in helping to design and develop the Lake Charles Trail through to Portobello along the canal. Well, looking down Lake Charles from here, you can imagine the dream of the original Shubenacadie Canal Company founders, with ships sitting in this lake waiting to ply their trade up and down the waterway. Now, interestingly, Lake Charles is the only one on the waterway that flows out in both directions, both towards Minas Basin and towards Halifax Harbour. These days, the headquarters of the Shubenacadie Canal Commission is in the Fairbanks Centre in Shuby Park at the other end of this lake. And they're very heavily involved in developing trails, promoting hiking, promoting paddling, tidal river rafting further up the waterway. So many different pursuits. In so many ways, this waterway is much more successful than it was in its original incarnation. You heard me mention Charles Fairbanks before I ducked off onto Vivian's Way. Lake Charles is named for him. Charles Rufus Fairbanks spent 20 or so years pushing for the development of a canal. He was a native Nova Scotian. His father had come to Halifax in 1780 from New England, where he married the daughter of a local merchant. Charles Fairbanks himself would marry in 1815, 4 years after he became a lawyer. He and his wife would have 13 children. 6 of them would live to adulthood. He was an important figure both in Nova Scotia, where he advocated for widespread public education, and also in London, where he was one of the few colonial residents invited to Westminster Abbey for the coronation of Queen Victoria. Ultimately a prominent judge and politician in Nova Scotia, his interest in the canal was largely self-serving. He had business interests in sawmilling, coal, whaling, forestry, and marine insurance, and wanted to challenge the dominance of St. John, New Brunswick, as a gateway for products coming out of the Bay of Fundy side of Nova Scotia. Fairbanks died in 1841, and despite being responsible for raising much of the original project financing, he never saw the completion of the canal project. Spring is often a wet time of year here in Nova Scotia. In fact, this is one of the few sunny days between a series of rainy days. But it's the rain that makes the small rivers and waterfalls run and turns the ground along this trail green. Spring in Nova Scotia also means the emergence of many different species. Along this waterway, you will start to see the resident ospreys moving back in and hunting for fish in the lake. Song sparrows are particularly common along this trail. The small brown and white sparrow is one of the most common birds in the province, and they are particularly active at this time of year. Down on the ground, coltsfoot, which is sometimes mistaken for the dandelion, starts to make an appearance. Coltsfoot is the bane of many gardeners as it spreads quickly underground and is hard to remove. It's believed it was introduced to the province long ago as a traditional medicine for respiratory problems. You will also begin to see lots of early season wildflowers and plants beginning to emerge before the tree canopy closes, blocking sunlight from the ground. Before I make my way into the center of Shuby Park, I'm going to take another little detour here. I'm from Dartmouth, and one of the things I often get asked about is where the Shuby Park or Lake Charles Tunnel is. Well, it used to be really hard to find. It's right up here. This trail is a lot more obvious now, and there's some signage around here that makes it easier to find. So let's go take a look. The tunnel in question was built under Highway 118 when it was constructed in the 1970s. It was primarily built as a wildlife corridor. This is the tunnel, and where it comes out is on Cutler Avenue in Burnside, and you can follow the trail right up to there. If you are driving down the highway, it's right about where the old Welcome to Dartmouth sign used to be. There's a Knights of Columbus sign here now. I'm not continuing on to Burnside, I am continuing to Shuby Park, so I'm going back to the main trail. Well, back from the tunnel and on the main trail, I'm headed into the heart of Shuby Park and into summer. That's after the break. Well, this trail looks vastly different from when I was here in spring. The rich green canopy is now shading the trail and in many cases preventing light from reaching the ground. I'm on the Lake Charles Trail, and I began this journey at the Portobello Plain in winter. Then I made it this far on the trail in spring. And now I'm headed to the Shuby Park Beach, my end destination, as I enjoy summer here. It's around 3 kilometers from here to the Shuby Park Beach along the Shubenacadie waterway. It's been a warm week the past few days, and I expect the beach will be getting busy today. Already I can see people in the lake taking advantage of the summer sun and the playground the waterway offers. But at one time, this waterway was all about business. One of the questions that often comes up on this trail is, where does this go? Well, if you were to follow this trail, it actually takes you up to what used to be a look-off. There is still a bench there, you could have a nice picnic there. Unfortunately, the trees have grown all around it, so you can't actually see anything. But it is a nice diversion off the trail. Before the break, I talked about plans for the waterway and some of the construction. In fact, the waterway was used commercially before construction was even completed. The first boat started moving along here in 1857, 4 years before the canal was completed from end to end. When it was completed, it was a redesigned waterway from the original plans and included 9 locks and 2 marine railways. One of those was where I started this hike in Portobello, and the other in Dartmouth near Sullivan's Pond. There were 3 full-time lock keepers who worked along this waterway, and each was responsible for 1/3 of the route. One captain suggested it could have been done in 10 or 12 hours, but this was as much a guess as anything, because over the life of the canal, only 1 ship ever did the entire journey, and even then only did it twice. That was the canal flagship, the Avery, and it was her captain who claimed it could be done in 12 hours or less. However, even he didn't accomplish that in either of his journeys. His first, in 1861, took 8 days due to stops for opening ceremonies and technical problems. The return trip was much faster, but it still took 3 days. Just above me is the osprey nest here in Shuby Park. The osprey is Nova Scotia's official provincial bird. The young ospreys there hatched earlier this spring, and those eggs are incubated for about 42 days, after which the young osprey will stay in the nest from 50 to 55 days before they fledge or leave the nest. And towards the end of that period of staying in the nest, they will learn to fish in the lake. At the moment, the adult is still bringing the young fish to eat, but they will be moving out fairly soon. One of the interesting things about osprey that is different from other birds of prey is that osprey only protect an area in the immediate vicinity of their nest, whereas other birds of prey like falcons will actually protect a much larger territory. This area is full of wildlife that is particularly active in summer, ranging from birds of all sorts, snakes, snapping turtles, muskrat fish, deer, bear, hare, and lots of small animals like chipmunk and squirrels. While many of these animals are in the park and along the trail year-round, in summer they come alive and make their presence known. The wildlife in this park is so used to people actually being around that they will land on your hands like this and just eat right out of your hands. This part of the Shubenacadie waterway is known as the Deep Cut, and it was the most expensive and labor-intensive part of the project to build. Every single version of the canal project included this, because there was no other way to get between Lake Micmac and Lake Charles other than cutting through this rock. It took 5 years to build. 5 years of chiseling and dynamite. Now, there was a holding pond built just before Lock 3, which is close to the Fairbank Center in the park, and then you went to Lock 2. Irish stonemasons did this work, and if you walk the trails along the canal in this park, you can still see the remains of the homes in which they lived. For a time, products ranging from gold-bearing quartz to lumber, bricks, and granite were moved up and down this waterway. There were a few famous vessels which plied their trade between Halifax and the Minas Basin. In addition to the Avery, the stern wheelers Mayflower and Lockport, and the largest of the vessels, a barge called Lily of the Lake. But in the end, the dream of a commercial waterway never really worked out. The Nova Scotia Railway broke ground in 1853, just 1 year before the second phase of construction on the canal began. Charles Fairbanks didn't quite understand how important the railway would become. In 1862, the property belonging to the canal company was sold at a sheriff's auction. The last load on the canal was a cargo of 13 tons of lumber, which passed this way on June 30th, 1870. The scene here is very different on the waterway than the canal founders would have ever imagined. This has not become a commercial success, but instead a recreation success. And I'm not sure that the canal ever could have become a commercial success. There were money issues, of course. And if you remember where I started my hike on the Portobello Plain in winter, well, of course, there was ice, and people need goods year-round. The canal could never supply that. And then there was the issue of the railway. The railway was not only a competitor, but at one point, a bridge was built across part of the waterway that was too low for ships to pass underneath. It was built without the consent of the canal operators. They took the issue to court, but they were not successful. The dream of this waterway, however, is still alive. There are many volunteers who dedicate all kinds of time to ensuring that the different artifacts and the different areas are reconstructed and protected and interpreted. And it is also a National Engineering Historic Site. So this is a special place, and it's a special place in all seasons. Charles Dickens once wrote that nature gives to each season a beauty of its own. And I think that no matter where you choose to hike, we can all appreciate that sentiment on our next walkabout.
Sunshine.